I've spent years as a flight attendant, drifting between cities and time zones, carrying stories most would dismiss as exhaustion or imagination. But the truth is, the skies and the hotels at the end of long journeys hold secrets passengers never know. Among countless destinations I've flown to, one stands apart, not for its beauty or culture, but for the unease that clings to it. It was a routine flight to Hakone, Japan, a route I'd taken many times. Yet every crew member whispered about the same thing. The Hakone hotel where we stayed was infamous, a place where the air felt heavy, corridors stretched too long, and unseen eyes seemed to watch in silence. That night, I'd learn why those whispers never faded. The first time I stayed at the Hakone Airport Hotel, I thought it'd be another uneventful night. One of those transient stops where travelers pass without leaving a memory. I checked in late, tired from the journey, expecting only a quiet room and a few hours sleep before my early flight. But the moment I opened the door to my assigned room, something inside told me this night would be different. The room seemed ordinary at first, compact, functional, with beige wallpaper and dark carpet like countless airport hotels. But as I rolled my suitcase in and set it against the wall, a heavy stillness hung in the air, as if the space had been sealed for far too long. Instinct told me to do what I always did in unfamiliar Asian hotels, a quiet ritual of checking and preparing the room. I walked slowly around, pulling curtains, flicking on every light, flushing the toilet once. It was a habit taught by older relatives, who believed such gestures signaled your presence to unseen energies lingering there. It was a way to say, "This space is now mine. Please leave me in peace." At the end, I rapped my knuckles gently on the wall 3 times, a small superstition to test the silence. The sound echoed back flat, hollow, like knocking on a door, to a room you weren't sure was empty. Satisfied, I unpacked lightly and crawled into bed. For the first couple of hours, nothing disturbed me. Occasional muffled footsteps in the hallway, the distant hum of a plane outside, usual hotel noises at night. I must have drifted off, though not deeply, for when the sound began, my eyes snapped open. It was faint at first, so faint I wondered if I was dreaming. A series of tiny, deliberate clicks like hard beads striking the floor. Then another, rolling, stopping, striking again. The unmistakable sound of marbles. I lay there, breath shallow, listening as the sound grew clearer. Marbles rolling, scattering, bouncing across the ceiling above me. The pattern repeated, as if a child were playing overhead, letting marbles tumble from one side to another. The strangest part? I was on the top floor. No room above mine, only the roof and the empty night sky beyond. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the air conditioning, pipes expanding, or the building settling at night. But deep down, I knew better. The sound was too distinct, too playful. It carried a strange innocence, yet beneath was something unsettling, like laughter at a funeral. I buried myself under the covers, forcing myself to ignore it, telling myself if I didn't acknowledge it, it'd pass. But the night had other plans. The telephone rang. The shrill tone shattered the room's silence, and I jolted upright, heart pounding. Who could be calling at this hour? My hands trembled as I reached for the receiver. I pressed it to my ear, half expecting static. Instead, a small, sweet voice began to sing. A, B, C, D. It was a child, a young child, singing the alphabet song, words soft but chillingly clear. The voice carried no joy, no playful rhythm, just a slow, measured recitation, rehearsed and unnatural. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I sat frozen as the child's voice went on, making it to the end. EXYZ. Now I know my ABCs. Then silence. No click of the line disconnecting. No sound at all. Just the empty hum of the dead receiver. My breath caught as I gently placed the phone back, as if sudden movement would invite the voice back. The room felt colder, air heavy on my skin. I lay awake all night, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening for marbles that rolled in waves, vanishing only when dawn's first light seeped through the curtains. By morning, I was pale, exhausted, but told myself I'd imagined most of it. Fatigue plays tricks on the mind. Maybe it was nerves, a hallucination from sleeplessness and superstition. With that fragile logic, I gathered my things, eager to leave the room behind. As I wheeled my suitcase into the hallway, I nearly collided with the cleaning staff. She was older than most I'd seen, back slightly stooped, face lined with age. She looked at me a long moment, gaze sharp, as if searching my face for something I couldn't name. Then she asked quietly, "Corner room, wasn't it?" I hesitated, nodded. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she shook her head. "You should avoid corner rooms in this hotel," she said softly, "especially at night. They remember things here." Before I could ask what she meant, she moved past with her cart, vanishing into another room without a glance. Her words lingered long after I checked out, louder than the marbles or the child's song. They remember things here. What did she mean? What memories clung to those corner rooms? What lives or deaths played out in the dark, long after the world moved on? Even now, years later, when I hear faint clatters of glass beads or a hotel phone's tinny ring in some strange room, I think back to that night in Hakone, to invisible marbles scattering across a non-existent ceiling, to a child's innocent yet hollow voice singing the alphabet in the dark, to an old woman's quiet warning, who knew far more than she said. And I wonder if those spirits are still there, waiting for the next traveler unlucky enough to spend a night in a corner room, where the walls themselves recall what the living have long forgotten. The flight from Surabaya to Bali was supposed to be ordinary. A short hop, just over an hour, the kind business travelers and tourists took daily without a second thought. For the cabin crew, this route was routine. Safety checks, drink service, smiling through fatigue. But on this flight, something was different, starting even before the plane left the ground. As boarding began, passengers filed in, dragging bags, shuffling to seats with weary impatience. The purser greeted them with polite warmth, while junior attendants guided them down aisles. All seemed normal, yet at row 12, a detail stood out. Seat 12C was supposed to be empty. The manifest showed no reservation for it. The booking system hadn't assigned it. The flight was nearly full, except for that single middle seat, a blank in the paperwork. But as boarding continued, an attendant glanced down the aisle and saw a woman sitting there, perfectly still, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her hair was long, black as ink, falling curtain-like around her pale face. She wore simple clothes, nothing standout, yet something about her was deeply unsettling. Her eyes, when she lifted them, were hollow. Not physically, her dark pupils sat in tired sockets, but hollow in their lack of expression. She looked at no one, yet her gaze seemed to pass through everything. When passengers brushed by, squeezing into seats, they stiffened, unsettled, but said nothing. At first, the attendants assumed an error. Maybe the manifest was wrong, a last-minute booking unrecorded. Mistakes happen. So the flight went on, final passengers boarded, doors sealed. For the first half hour, the woman in 12C stayed silent. She didn't request water, didn't respond to offers of snacks, didn't shift in her seat. Others tried to ignore her, but her out-of-place presence pressed on the cabin like an invisible weight. Then came the first disturbance. A passenger 2 rows back raised his hand for assistance. He whispered that the woman from 12C had been standing in the aisle moments before, just standing, blocking the walkway, staring toward the rear without moving. He said he blinked, and in that blink, she was gone. But when the attendant walked forward, she was back in her seat, motionless, as if she'd never risen. Later, another attendant, checking the lavatories, opened a door to find the woman inside. Or so she thought. The door had been locked, but after knocking and getting no answer, she used her key, expecting an unwell passenger. For a brief instant, she saw the figure standing in the cramped space, hair covering her face, hands braced against the mirror. But when she blinked, the stall was empty. The door swung wide, revealing only stale air and disinfectant. By then, whispers spread among the crew. Something was wrong. The passenger in 12C wasn't on their lists. No boarding stub, no record. Yet there she was, occupying her seat like she'd always been there. Passengers began complaining quietly. A young mother said her child refused to look toward row 12, whimpering and hiding his face whenever the woman shifted. A businessman swore he'd seen her walk the aisle during turbulence, steady as if the shaking didn't touch her. When he confronted her, the seatbelt sign glowed red, yet she vanished before he could alert the crew. The crew, torn between duty and fear, did what they could. They checked manifests repeatedly. They whispered, debating whether to speak to her. But each time one approached, they hesitated, voices catching in their throats. Something in her stillness pressed on them like a warning. When the flight began its descent, relief washed over passengers and crew. The captain's voice announced the approach to Bali, ending what felt like an endless journey. Attendants did a final cabin check, ensuring seatbelts were fastened, tray tables locked. At row 12, they noted with unease that the woman sat upright, unmoving, eyes fixed on the seat back before her. The landing was smooth, the cabin filling with passengers eager to disembark. Bags were pulled down, seatbelts unclicked, conversations rose. Row by row, passengers shuffled out. When the crew did their final sweep for forgotten items, they reached row 12 again. The seat was empty. The woman was gone. Not just gone, but gone without a trace. No bag, no jacket, no sign she'd ever been there. The seatbelt was neatly folded, untouched. The floor was clear, as if she'd never existed. The crew exchanged looks of disbelief. Some laughed it off, muttering that fatigue played tricks. But others knew what they'd seen. They recalled her hollow eyes, how she stood in the aisle without swaying, the strange silence following her. Passengers murmured too, unsettled by her absence. Some asked questions no one could answer. Did she leave before landing? Was she real at all? The story still circulates among those on that route. Flight attendants whisper about seat 12C, warning new crew to watch if it's empty on the manifest. They say sometimes, on certain nights, when cabin lights dim and the sky turns black, a woman with long black hair appears there again, staring ahead with hollow, endless eyes, waiting to vanish into the unknown. Night had fallen heavy by the time we reached the hotel. It was a long work trip, the kind where exhaustion settles deep before you've unpacked. My colleague and I had travelled for hours, our flight delayed, the car ride from the airport dragging through traffic and winding roads. When the hotel's front doors opened, the cool rush of air conditioning and polished lobby lights felt like a blessing. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The hotel was neither luxurious nor shabby, somewhere in between, comfortable for professionals, but old enough to show wear, carpet frayed at edges, brass fixtures dulled, faint watermarks on the ceiling. The staff greeted us warmly, the receptionist checking us in with efficiency. She handed us keys with a practiced smile, pointing down the hallway. Our rooms, she said, were on the ground floor, each with a balcony overlooking the garden. The walk to our rooms was short. The corridor smelled of polish and damp wood, the scent of a building weathered by humid summers. My room was at the hall's end. Inside, it was simple but cozy. A single bed with crisp sheets, a small desk with a flickering lamp, heavy curtains drawn against the night. Pulling them back revealed a balcony with a view of the garden, where faint lanterns glowed among trees. It seemed peaceful. My colleague and I exchanged weary glances, silently grateful the day was over. Sleep came quickly, at first. Deep in the night, I woke with a start. At first, I couldn't place what disturbed me. The room was still, the air conditioner's hum steady. Then I heard it, faint footsteps echoing through the corridor, small, quick steps, the patter of children running. I frowned, glancing at the clock. Nearly 2 a.m. What children would be up, racing through a hotel corridor? I lay still, listening. The footsteps grew louder, joined by a child's shrill laughter, high-pitched and fleeting. The sound darted from one end of the hallway to the other, as if a game of tag unfolded outside. Curiosity turned to unease. After several minutes, I rose and crept to the door. Opening it, the corridor stretched out, silent and empty. The carpet muffled sound, but there were no children, no movement. The air felt heavy, fluorescent lights flickering faintly overhead. I stepped out, peering left and right, but nothing. No trace of voices, no footsteps, only silence. Shivering, I retreated, locking the door. Maybe I'd been dreaming, I told myself. Maybe fatigue played tricks. But the noises returned the next night. Again, past midnight, laughter pierced the silence, sharper now, followed by the pounding rhythm of small feet. My colleague and I opened our doors at the same moment, exchanging bewildered glances across the hall. We both heard it. We knew it was real. Yet the corridor was empty again. The laughter faded as suddenly as it began, leaving only the air conditioner's hum. My colleague swore under his breath, shaking his head. Neither of us had the courage to chase the sound deeper into the hall. We retreated to our rooms, left with the same question. What was happening here? By morning, fatigue weighed heavy on us both. Over breakfast, we debated raising it. I decided to ask the receptionist casually if families were staying on our floor. She froze for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. Then, with a forced smile, she shook her head. "No children, sir," she said. "Not on the ground floor." I pressed, mentioning the noises. Her demeanor faltered slightly. eyes darting to a colleague before returning to me. Then, too quickly, she offered compensation. Upgraded rooms on a higher floor, free breakfast for our stay, assurance everything would be handled. Her eagerness unsettled me more than her denial. Hotels don't usually bend over backward for noise complaints, not to the point of moving guests without protest. My colleague and I accepted without argument, though unease coiled in my stomach. The new rooms were on the third floor, brighter, more modern, with wide city views. That night, we slept undisturbed. No laughter, no footsteps, no voices in the corridor. For the first time since arriving, I relaxed. But the mystery gnawed at me. It wasn't until the next afternoon, returning to the ground floor to retrieve something from the old room, that I overheard a cleaning lady. She was middle-aged, face lined with years of work, more open than the desk staff. When I mentioned the noises, her expression tightened. She glanced down the hall, lowered her voice, and told me what others wouldn't. "People say this corridor is haunted," she whispered. "Years ago, before I worked here, a family stayed. Their child. Something terrible happened. He ran into the corridor at night, never came back. Since then, guests hear him running, laughing, calling out, especially in ground floor rooms." My blood drained. She must have noticed, because she added quickly, "But don't worry, it's only sound. He doesn't harm anyone." Her words clung like a shadow. Back on the third floor, my colleague waited, curious about my absence. I told him what I'd learned, and his face paled too. We didn't speak of it again, not then, not even when we checked out. But the memory followed me. The sound of invisible footsteps echoing whenever silence stretched too long. Even now, when I recall that trip, it's not the meetings or long work hours that linger. It's that corridor in Indonesia, the faint laughter at 2 a.m., the way staff dodged our questions. It's the uneasy thought that somewhere in that quiet ground floor hallway, a child's spirit still plays a game that never ends. Nights in unfamiliar places carry their own weight. For travelers and crew, hotels are meant for rest, yet many forget these buildings hold countless stories in their walls. Tales of departures, tragedies, things that refuse to move on. In Asia, whispers warn of corner rooms, rooms vacant too long, or those locals never book. In those spaces, behind closed doors, spirits sometimes linger. Perhaps these are just tales to unsettle the mind, but those who've experienced them know better. A strange knock with no one there, a flicker at vision's edge, a voice calling softly in the dark. Such things leave marks not easily erased. The line between living and dead is thinner than we wish, and every journey risks stepping too close. So when you travel, be cautious. Respect the unseen. And if tonight's tale left you chilled, remember, there are more to tell. Subscribe, stay with us, prepare for the next haunting story from Asia.